Regina, and I have to echo what you said. I'm so glad Rosemary was a part of this because I think it was her inspiration that allowed us to bring this gathering to a new level. So we're very grateful for her support and her, and her spirit, I think, is here in the room. When we were thinking about this particular alumni gathering, we started to think about, what should we do? Who should we have? How should we address this? I mean, there's so many issues in leadership, but honestly, they seemed kind of boring. So we're saying, okay, yeah, you can do, how to manage a department, how to talk with your fellow faculty, how to lead without authority. But this seemed a particularly stressful time this year. I think everyone has been feeling some of the stress that's been going on and change. And so as we were looking at leaders, we came across Liz's website, and both Marian and I were like, yes, this is what we need to talk about. We need to change the conversation. We need to broaden our perspective of what it means to be a leader. And she was very grateful to say yes. So let me tell you a little bit about her, because it is my privilege to introduce Reverend Walker to our Rosemary Johnson Symposium. Reverend Walker is currently pastor of the Roxbury Presbyterian Church. And under her leadership, the RPC is home to the Corey Johnson Trauma Project. That's an innovative program that addresses the epidemic of post-trauma stress in low-income African-American communities who are so often exposed to violence. The Trauma Education Project works to increase community awareness of PTSD, as well as improving access to mental health services, and more importantly, empowering community members with the skills to cope and respond. Her calling as a minister is the latest and highest reach of a life's journey, which included, and this I didn't know, and this is fascinating, 11 years of humanitarian work in the Sudan, which she co-founded the humanitarian organization called My Sister's Keeper, which focuses on an economic and educational initiatives in Sudan. And how I know her best, and probably many of us in the room, 21 years as Boston's first African-American television news anchor on WBZ. And I have to say personally, I grew up in my household. The news didn't come from Twitter, it came from Liz and Jack. And we believed them. She is a graduate of the Harvard Divinity School and has long been actively involved in community service and projects. She founded the Jane Doe Safety Fund, a $1 million statewide anti-violence initiative that works on policy and supports domestic abuse shelters and safe houses around Massachusetts. And she's a member of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization and serves on many more boards than I can actually say. She's been awarded honorary degrees from numerous institutions, including the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, Boston College, Simmons College, Salem State, and Bridgewater State. And we are thrilled to have Liz come and talk to us about grace in a very stressful time.
Thank you and good morning. I am honored to be here with you this morning and to meet your provost, to hear about the history and legacy of this organization and this particular gathering, and to tell you a little bit about my story in the context of grace. People always kind of go back to the day. First people say, I remember you when I was in the 3rd grade. And that's supposed to make me feel good. Or they'll say, I know we're on TV, so I won't walk around too far. I usually walk around, I'm sorry. Now they're saying, my grandmother loves you. But it was back in the day, when television news was, it seemed a little simpler. There were no allegations of fake news. It was, there were only 3 or 4 channels. You actually had to get up and go change those channels. And it seemed that life was a lot simpler. And when you talk about leadership, first my career in television news, and then the humanitarian work that we did in Sudan. I have also been an entrepreneur and had my own business, and now I am a preacher in an urban ministry. And this is the greatest challenge to leadership of for a woman particularly, of any job I've had. You are running not only, when I was in divinity school, it was all about the spiritual, it was all about the philosophical, it was reading, and it was all about social justice, but it certainly wasn't about how to run a business, because at church you're trying to keep the lights on. And so that's the other issue of leadership. How do you move people to give? So it's just been an extraordinary journey, but I wanted to tell you how I get through what I do, because I think there's some lessons for all of us, especially in these very uncertain and very traumatic times. The trauma work that we do in our neighborhood is focused on people who have experienced violence, gun violence mainly. We have young people who are out of control. We have families who are mourning and grieving losses from generations ago. And we have people who are stuck in their lives, and we're trying to help them. And these are my neighbors. But I've come to the conclusion that this country is in trauma right now, that things are happening so fast, and things are so uncertain, and you're never sure what's going on, that we're all a little traumatized. That if you turn on the television and watch too long, you start to get a twitch. Or you feel like you want to slap somebody. I mean, it's just a very kind of aggressive atmosphere that this country is in the midst of right now. Without naming names, it's just the way things are. I participated in a summer march last August in Boston, 40,000 people. Did anybody hear? It was an amazing march. It was against the Charlottesville rally that ended up in death and violence. And so 40,000 people gathered in Roxbury and walked a mile or two to the Boston Common. And it was a wonderful experience. It reminded me of growing up in the South, because I grew up in a situation around the civil rights movement, so activism is in my DNA. But the big picture of the march was that it was a great success. But if you were in the midst of the march, and we were right at the beginning, where the young people from Black Lives Matter were at the lead, the atmosphere was very aggressive and belligerent and boorish, and there was bullying, and the language was offensive. And we're the good guys. And these young people are on a truck, and we are walking, ministers from all faiths walking behind them. That was our role. And I was almost in tears by the time we got at the end of the rally. Anger, I understand. I get it. The kids should be angry. We all should be righteously indignant about some of the things that are going on in the world, including the senseless slaughter of our children. So anger I get, but this kind of aggressiveness and this kind of disrespectful, contentious behavior just threw me. I just hadn't been in the midst of it. So I came off this rally, and they were screaming at us. My son, who is 30 years old, I taught, you respect your elders. Why is that old-fashioned? Why is that I don't even understand how young people are screaming at grown-ups who represent religious institutions. Anyway, I won't work my issues out here. My point was, it just left me very disheartened, because these were my children from my community. This wasn't blue versus red. These were all on the same team. So by the end of the march, I decided I've got to figure out what happened to civility. Where did it go? And I started reading books on civility, and there's a lot of conversation on this now because of the contention of our times. And could I write a book on what civility was all about? And I went to this one author who seemed right, and the book was called Saving Civility, and I'm reading it, and then in the introduction, this author says, like me, she longs for the good old days. And I'm going to read you the part that she says. She says, I grew up in a culture of Southern manners in which we were accustomed to ritualized ways of conveying respect toward one another in our interpersonal relationships. There was a standard of codified behavior that was both accepted and expected. And at first this seems, yes, this is right. But then when you think about it a little bit deeper, she is in the South. So her good old days were my horrible days. And her civility was my oppression. And her manners were my back of the bus. So the notion of civility as a one kind of idea that fits everything is wrong. Civility, is that a real standard? Is it a standard that we all can share? Listen to this story. One August night, two men walked into a popular restaurant in a shopping mall in Atlanta. They sat on a bar, ordered drinks, and were pondering the menu when two women came in behind them. And the bartenders and the women stood. The men are sitting at the bar, the women are standing. The bartender asked the two men, would you get up and give these women a seat? And the men said, absolutely not. Now, at first sight, that seems, okay, that's wrong. That's what happened to civility. In this case, angry words came next. This ends up in court. $3 million in damages. The bar charged the men. Now, here's the point. The men were black. The women were white. The men fought getting up because they said what you're calling chivalry is a cloak for discriminatory racial practices. After a week's worth of testimony, a judge decided in favor of the bar. It's complicated. Civility is complicated. And I'm thinking, my son, I've taught him, you get up if a woman comes in. That's no longer the standard. So I needed more information on civility. Now, this is a book I do recommend. Keith Bybee, who's a law professor at Syracuse University, and his book is called How Civility Works. And he goes down through history where he says, really, civility is about who's winning and who's in charge. And the rules are created by the winners, right? So he says, 19th century Americans blamed the Civil War, new immigrants, urban life, the vulgar rich for all the problems in the world. That almost sounds familiar. Then there was the jazz music, World War I and II, the Great Depression, the Vietnam War. All of these things were threats to civility during those times. Bybee raises the question, should we even believe people are capable of getting along? So if our young people are screaming and ranting and raving at us, is it even reasonable to think that there's another way? According to Bybee, the courts, of course, interpret the guarantee of the First Amendment, and as a result, our public discussion has to be robust, it has to be edgy to get all the ideas out on the table. So who are we to say what's too edgy and what's not edgy enough? But that still doesn't answer my question. Can we expect some form of a way to relate to each other? And that's why I speak about grace. You see, civility is a standard, a social standard. Grace is much more personal. But I think grace deserves a little bit more thought. As I said, I grew up during the civil rights movement, and I was inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance was based on the notion of love. The agapic love based on the Good Samaritan, redirected expectations, opened up new possibilities, and so it brings up this concept of mutuality. King said we're all tied into a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. What affects me directly is going to affect you indirectly. So he connected all of this to love. And it worked for a little while. Now, at the 50th anniversary of his death, people are re-examining his words to see if there's anything we can get out of this time. And there's a lot of talk about his economic empowerment philosophy and about his anti-war philosophy, and that's all very valid and it's all very real. But I think we should go back to his notion of grace and love, because that's what brought all kinds of people in a very disturbing, very crazy time to the table, and they found some mutuality. There was this notion of grace. Now I know that grace is a real religious word. And I know you're thinking, oh my goodness, is this woman going to stand up here and preach? And I am not going to preach. I know that grace begins in the sense of the church's notion of divine forgiveness. But I would argue that grace was there before religion. As a matter of fact, one of my authors, who was a religious author, his name is Philip Yancey, he writes that grace is our last best word. I want you to think about that for a minute. We have trivialized love. We have confused the notion of love. In my neighborhood, love is confused with power or submission or abuse. Love is I love the Red Sox, I love you. Nobody knows what love is anymore. But grace holds its own as a word. You go to the restaurant, and if someone gives you good service, you give them a gratuity. The banks or economic institutions give you, well, they used to give you a grace period and paying back that loan. If someone is particularly elegant or accommodating, he or she is considered gracious. So there's this little something extra when we talk about grace. So that's why I work on this theory that we need to teach each other and learn ourselves how to practice grace. It's a word that can step outside the church into the world. And it's more than forgiveness. Let me give you an example. I live in Jamaica Plain, a beautiful neighborhood on the western side of the city. And it's kind of bordered by this wonderful kind of ribbon of a lane, a two-lane roadway that goes between Boston out to West Roxbury, out to Roslindale. And its history is such that it, I'm sure in its prime, when there were horses and carriages, it would be just the place to be on a Sunday afternoon, to pass these beautiful old mansions, to pass the conservation land, and it just kind of meandered through. But today, this roadway, the Jamaica Way, is just congested with traffic. And I live right on the corner there. So if you're kind of trying to get into the city from the west and you don't want to take another route, this is the way to go. And the traffic does not move. And not only does the traffic not move, people are angry on the Jamaica Way. Now this is not 93. This is not, you know what I mean? It's not Sturrow Drive. Some roads you should be angry on because they're so horrible, right? This is just lovely. All you have to do is look out your window and you can see this wonderful, people are mad on the Jamaica Way. And the other thing that gets me is that they're not even going fast. They're just mad in slow motion. So this is where I'm getting my theory that the world is just gone mad. We're not even sure why. I'd like to blame 45, but I'm not sure that he is the reason. I think he may be the symptom, but the problem is bigger. We are angry. So I live where on one side, the pond, Jamaica Pond, is on the other. If I want to cross Jamaica Way, I am at the mercy of this traffic that's not going anywhere, but everybody's mad. And nobody gives anybody any room. So it's bumper to bumper, and I'm trying to get across the street, and there's some intersections where there are lights, but there's some corners where you used to be able to walk across, and so you stand there and you hope somebody lets you through. And they're texting, or they're putting on makeup, or they're talking, but they refuse to see me at that corner. And my idea is, wait a minute, let's think about this. None of you are moving fast. You're only going to work. Why couldn't you allow a little space in between you so that somebody could get in? So here's my theory about grace. It's giving somebody a little space, giving them a little break. We need to give each other a break. because we're all under stress. We're all ready to explode. We're all trying to keep our eyes on all these things and keep our hands and keep all the balls, and we need a break. We need a break. We need a break. I need a break. And let me tell you why I know I need a break. I'm a preacher, right? So I've spent 13 years now, maybe longer than that, trying to be holy, trying to be all those things, trying to learn about God, trying to be good. I'm coming into the city of Boston one day, and I've had a horrible time. I missed a meeting, was late. Now I'm coming down. There's this lane where you get off 93 onto Sturrow Drive, and there's a entrance lane from 93, not far from the Zakim Bridge. And it's always a long line of traffic. See, if you study traffic, you can see the world's problems. Long line of traffic, trying to get in. You get into the lane, you gotta wait. It's gonna take you a little while. Then you start noticing the people from your right who are coming in, and they're just gonna drive up, and as soon as they get a chance, they're gonna cut you off. Now, generally, this doesn't bother me because I'm a Mother Teresa of Jamaica Plain. But this particular day, I had it. I'm juggling a lot of balls. I've got this, I've got that. So I'm in my car. This guy just comes in. He's going to cut me off. Not today. Slow motion road rage on the entrance ramp to Sturrow Drive. I'm like, he's inching, I'm inching. I'm not giving an inch. He won't give an inch. I just kept, and I wasn't going to give it up. He was shocked, because I think he thought he could bully me into, now I'm not saying this like this is a victory, but at the moment, it was a victory. It dawned on me how easy it is to slip into this mode of us against them. It's really easy. Now, if you add to that an atmosphere where you're always hearing that on television, in Congress, you're lost. Civility may not work now, or at least what we commonly refer to as civility. So this notion of grace, this very intimate act that's just between you and the world, is the best way to handle it. What I should have done at that moment is just taken a deep breath and let it out and let it go. And I think that that is more important than ever for us now, to let some things go. It is a way to not just survive in the world, but it's a way to give to the world, if you will. It's a way to give. Having a background in television news, I know there's no grace there. That's not what television news is about. It's about confrontation. It's about good guys, bad guys, right, wrong, black, white. That's what it is. It's very few chances, opportunities are taken to give you the subtlety of life, to give you the nuances of life, to give you the complications of life. There was a scene out of this Parkland shooting where the young man who is alleged to have done the shooting is in court, and his attorney, his court-appointed attorney, has her arm around him very maternally. And the commentator is just livid that this attorney would do this for this child. And that's just that person is doing that because that's a legal move. That's a move to sway everybody. This is a murderer. This is an animal. And I'm thinking it's not that simple. There's a complication here. This is somebody's baby. Now, murderer, absolutely, if that's what the court decides, but it's not so simple. Grace is necessary here, not civility, not saying this child or whoever does what shouldn't face consequences. Grace is not a replacement for consequences. You have consequences. You will face your consequences, but grace is a way to take the edge off of the tension of the world. Traffic, meetings, conversations, leadership. Now, the idea of grace for me came back in 2001, right around the same time of the bombings in New York, when I was traveling to Sudan. I went to South Sudan with a group of Bostonians, ministers, human rights activists, humanitarians, who were investigating allegations of slavery in South Sudan. Back then, there was one country, all of Sudan divided into the north and the south. Now, South Sudan is the world's newest country. But it's been a region that's always been at war against itself. Millions of people have been slaughtered in a dispute over oil, a dispute over land, a dispute over race, a dispute over the Arab Islamists against the African indigenous tribes. And so there's just hell going on in Sudan. That's just been the way it is and has been forever. So we went there investigating these allegations of slavery, that the people in the north, the Islamic, extreme Islamic cults, were taking people in the south as slaves to work their land. And it was such an extraordinary moment that I couldn't turn it down. I thought, this will be a story and I will get an Emmy, because slavery in the 21st century, that's insane. But the people who went were going to see what could be done to help the people in South Sudan. And so the first trip was about 3 weeks, being on the ground, going to villages that had been bombed, talking to people who had lost limbs and lost husbands and lost babies to war, people who lived in constant chaos. I had never been in a conflict zone. I had never lived around people who were constantly looking for the bombs and whose children knew the difference between the planes that were friendly planes and the planes that were the enemy. I'd never been in that kind of situation. But I noticed in the midst of that, first of all, you go into a situation like that, you're in a constant a state of flight possibilities, because you're always looking for a way out. But when you go in a humanitarian trip, a plane drops you off, the plane takes off, so you have no way out. There's no calling the cab, there's no waiting on the bus, you are with this group you're in. So you're in this kind of traumatic state because you don't know what's going to happen. But I noticed the people who lived there, and these were villages that were populated mainly by women and children, because the men were at war, were these grace-filled places. Now, I'm not trying to romanticize Africa. I'm not trying to romanticize Sudan. There is a hideous and an inhumane horror going on, ongoing in that part of the world. But on the ground, people who are trying to survive, people who are trying to get through traffic, if you will, have found this way of being that is gracious, meaning they help each other out. Hospitality is a way of life. It's not a choice, it's the way you live. Now, hospitality in the Middle East and in Africa, in that part of the world, is very important. It's religious in the Muslim communities, it's religious, it's important in the Christian community, doesn't matter. It's how you're supposed to live your life. Your point is, when you come into my little compound, whatever I have, I give to you. And that is real there. And the irony is, nobody has anything, but they give what they have. This is what I noticed. I think it might be because they're at war and they realize that, and this is a way that we can all survive by helping, this mutuality, by helping each other out. I'm not sure. But what it touched me was, they had found a way through horror. They had found a way through chaos. They were just helping each other out as best they could. Now, on the political level, revenge is a policy, right, in this part of the world. You shoot me, I'm going to shoot you. But on the ground, you see this notion of belonging. And if you are here, you belong to me. I don't know how realistic that is for the world, and sometimes my more cynical self says that that won't work. But I think it will. I think it works when you have no other options. We were there for 3 weeks that first year, and it was very scary. It's a place I'd never been, but I wanted to do whatever I could do to fit in. I don't want to stand out because I don't want you to get mad at me. I don't know what's going to happen. If there's an attack here, I want you to be able to help me get out too. So I'm going to try to be what I need to be with you. And so this notion of grace came up, that these people gave me something, grace meaning that unmerited gift. I'm going to give you something even if I don't know you, even if you've done nothing good for me, I'm going to give you all I've got, was a way that I saw those people live. I had a camera, a small camera, and I was trying to shoot video of this first trip. And while I'm shooting, I go and see this wonderful woman who is like built, like she works out all the time. But the reason she's so built in her arms and her body is that she's grinding grain. She has this kind of giant mortar and pestle, a stick and a big bowl, and the maize, the corn that she raises for her family, she has to pound that into flour. And so she does that for about 4 to 6 hours a day, just to live, right? So she's pounding the bread, and her arms are just beautiful, and she's so graceful as she does this. And I'm trying to take a picture of it, and I accidentally kick over, I didn't see, a bowl of flour that she had worked for several hours to get. And I destroyed it, just like that. And I couldn't speak her language, she couldn't speak mine. She looked at me, I apologize, I'm so sorry. But there was nothing I could do to make this right. Later on, when we were going to another village, we had to walk because the truck didn't come. And in this crowd of women who decided that they would help us by volunteering to take our bags on their heads, there was this woman. I had messed her over in the morning, but in the afternoon, she was there for me. They weren't looking for money. American dollars mean nothing in the bush of Sudan, right? That was just their way of being in the world. So I guess it was a spiritual experience for me, because I had not seen this kind of quality of life in the midst of chaos. I have talked to other people who have told me of similar experiences in other parts of the world that is considered the third world, the developing world. But in a sense, they have developed some things that we have no idea about. This notion of apology and forgiveness matters. It has been dealt with diplomatically. If you remember, in 1990, East Germany, just before it becomes whole Germany, issued a formal apology to Israel and the Jews of the world, saying, we're sorry for what we did. We were wrong. That was huge. They took responsibility for the slaughter of 6 million Jews during World War II. And this was the beginning of an extraordinary shift in global politics. That was the practicing of grace, apology, and forgiveness. And of course, we all remember in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That was an exercise in a social sense of apology and forgiveness. So my point is, it works. It does work. Will it ever work again? I'm not sure, but it has been tried and it does work. So I am arguing that grace is really the highest form of civility. It means that we can walk into a room, we can disagree really passionately, but I can still give you the space to do that, offer you the dignity of hearing you out. I'm really listening to you. I will respect you. And there will be a mutuality in this sense that what you're mad at is not me. The disagreement is the point, but not the person. So that's grace. It's nothing that most of you probably don't try anyway, but I want to lift it up to remind us that it matters. Because in the discourse that's underway now, you start questioning those things that you used to think were solid. Maybe I shouldn't use this way. Maybe I should go this way. No, this matters. I saw an interview on Netflix, David Letterman and Barack Obama. Oh my God, it was so wonderful. It didn't even matter if they were reading the phone book. It was so wonderful. There was humor, there was lightness, there was this space given, there was grace in the conversation. Even a conversation affects you. It doesn't matter what the politics are. It's just the idea that someone can handle a situation with grace, with this dignity, with this kind of serenity. And I'm not saying we all have to be, like a monk but there is something about this mindfulness, being in this moment and understanding that I'm going to give you my best. Now, Barack Obama's nationality was questioned. He was called a monkey. He was hit with everything that could be hit. And somehow he managed to people got mad because he didn't get angry. Remember the days? Oh, now we get it. Now we wouldn't mind to have somebody who has a little piece about him. I'm not talking politics. I'm just talking how we carry ourselves and what it means. Right now, I'm the minister of a small church, as I said, Roxbury Presbyterian Church. And our practice of trauma work is really trying to deal with grace in the midst of chaos. There are shootings every week in my neighborhood. The news only reports on the deaths. Gun violence is just ongoing. It is a frightening place to live. And I say that with all the love, knowing 90% of the people in that neighborhood are wonderful. But there is a very vocal, angry 10% that is creating havoc for the rest of us. And so what you find are people who are not dealing with the anger, not dealing with the violence, and they have normalized it. Now let me tell you about normalizing insanity. It only drags you down. That's my neighborhood. So my call is, this is not normal. Don't let this be normal. And that's my call to the world. Because you see, you don't just fall into insanity. You go into it slowly sometimes, and you don't even know it. It's like the story about the frog. You put the frog in the pot, and you turn up the heat, not too hot, and the frog's having a grand old time, not realizing he's being boiled to death, right? And he's dead before he knows it. That's what happens in my neighborhood. So we say that healing with trauma, or healing from trauma, involves rewiring your brain and retelling your story. And it's more complicated than that. But one of the things that we are trying to teach our neighbors is that you don't have to be defined by the chaos in your life. That your story is bigger than that. We're not negating the chaos. We're not saying it didn't happen, but there's a way to have a bigger picture around that. And as part of that process, we suggest to our neighbors that they offer themselves some grace, that they take a deep breath, that they give themselves a break, that they forgive themselves. So this notion of grace, this intimate way of being in the world, that somehow you are separated from the chaos just by your being, is a healing mechanism. And it's a slow healing. There is nothing overnight about this. And it's something that you have to constantly come back to. That's why I use the analogy of being on Jamaica Plain or Jamaica Way or being on 93, because you're always going to be in traffic. And that person's always going to try to cut you off. But that taking that deep breath, that letting it out, that realizing that you have a power within you to let this go, I think ultimately could help save us all. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't know what we are for time. Do we have, if I talk too short, too long, or am I right on? Because I wanted to have conversation with you. I'm working on this as a possible book, as a possible, it is my sermon, it is my story, but I want to make sure I'm communicating it. I don't want it to be too religious, because I think that can be, that can close doors. But I needed a question. Yes, sir.
So I think we all felt a moment of what we're talking about.
Oh, wait a minute, we have a mic.
Thank you. Paul Bendinger. I'm from Public Health down on the Boston campus. I think we all feel a moment of what you're talking about after 9/11. I think there were hours, days, maybe weeks when we felt that sense that we're connected to one another, and that there was that sense of, yes, go ahead. There was that letting go. I remember there was a conversation about it for a short while, at any rate, that we experienced at that time, and then it got lost. It was like a social capital that we lost somewhere along the way. But I think we need to find a way to connect to that, or use that as a foil to pick up the points that you're making and to move forward, because I think the points you're making are well appreciated.
Thank you. And I agree with you that it's easy to lose. It's easy to lose. It may have to do with, I was watching Oprah the other day, it may have to do with your own practices, your own spiritual practices, your own practices of mindfulness, your own way of how you discipline yourself in the world. Because it's intimate. That's what I like about it. It's not a movement. I've been there, done that. There's a reason for that, and there's a place for that. It's just a way to be. But I think you're right there. How to keep it going, or how to keep it on the top of your mindset. Now, the easy answer is y'all should come to church, but I'm not going down there. No, I'm not going down there. We have to figure out our own way to get there. I have a 9-year-old girl in my church who, in my outreach center in our trauma work, but they start at the trauma work and then they end up at the church. Her foster mother, who works with the city of Boston, brought her. And she came out of just horrible situation, chaos, and was taken out of her home, and is only 9. She's about this big, and she is just an angry child. And part of her problem is she was given the wrong medication too soon, and her brain never developed, and she's brilliant, and she's just angry. And the psychologists who are trying to work with her, and the psychiatrists, and all the social service agencies that you are well aware of, they don't know. They don't know if she's going to make it. I mean, because she's lost in so many ways. But she has a woman who wants to keep her, and who is just sticking it out with her. And this little girl will go off on you, and it's like Exorcist. It's like that girl that the head turned. And I'm scared of her because you just don't know how to cope. But this notion of grace with her is just backing off of her, trying to listen, and trying to offer her. It just works in so many different ways, I guess I'm saying. And it's so necessary with people who are in chaos. We just have to find a way. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really just beautiful, your thinking on this and reflections, and I love the way you look at grace as really the highest form of civility. I would love to hear your thoughts on the emotional dimensions of this, especially in our society when emotion is often pushed to the sidelines, and but to talk about the role of developing emotional literacy, emotional agility, and then also thinking about gendered emotions and thinking about maybe gender not necessarily in a binary way, but there's a lot of research and a lot of evidence, as we look within this patriarchy, and we think about anger and males in our society and the ways that males are brought up to push down emotion. So I would love to hear your thoughts on emotion, emotional agility, gendered emotion, and around civility.
I can't give you any kind of expert response to that, but I can give you anecdotal response. I have in our trauma group, our trauma center is based around community conversations, which we have once a month. It's called Can We Talk, and we invite, there's a sign on the church, we invite anybody and everybody. We partner with Boston Medical Center, and their psychiatric staff works with us. This is a new partnership. And we have pro bono counselors that come in sometimes and one-on-one care, but the base is this gathering where we all talk. And it's sort of like AA. You get up and tell your story, and we are your loving community. We're not judging you, we don't have an answer, we're not fixing you, but we will give you grace in this moment. And many of our neighbors are men. And many of them are men who have been in prison, and men who are in recovery, and men who are struggling with all kinds of extreme situations, who are trying to grasp something that they've lost a long time ago. And they, to a man, say that they have never had the opportunity to cry or be emotional, if you will. And so they've been keeping all of this inside. And this experience, and through counseling that they do with the city and other agencies, they are beginning to get more in touch with themselves. So to that extent, men need to have an outlet just like women do. And I think that our preconceived roles, the man is, the provider and the aggressor and has, in a way, has not helped some men, at least the men in my neighborhood. So these men are rethinking the way their emotions are connected and how important that is. I think that getting in touch, again, this is just anecdotal, I don't have an answer, but what we're trying to do is say that the resiliency comes out of this letting go, right? The strength comes from, we look at grace as, well, sometimes you look at grace or something like that as a weakness, but it's really, I think Barack Obama is a powerful man because he never gave in. I'm trying to think of that TV show I used to like, and the guy did Kung Fu. It wasn't called Kung Fu. David Cassidy, and he was, does anybody remember? This is back in the day. This is way back in the day. But he was all at one with the universe, and nothing ever messed with him. But if you made him mad, David Cassidy, God, this is the whole thing about losing it. David Carradine, it wasn't Kung Fu, but Grasshopper, we're getting there. That's it, that's a part of it. It was a Western, but he was an Asian guy who knew the art of whatever. Kung Fu. It was Kung Fu? That was the name of it? Well, that's what I said. But anyway, the notion of, I didn't even know, I'm so lost, yeah. The notion of that mindfulness, that being in touch with self. Anyway, I think that's the answer, and some men are getting it at my level, in my neighborhood. Yes, ma'am.
We talk a lot about grace as a one-on-one thing between people. A one-on-one thing between.
That was a door.
Oh, good. It was like scary. That's odd. Between people, but how do you see it at all from an institutional perspective? Like within leadership, which is, I guess, this group here, how do leaders implement grace and not do? I mean, because I think a lot of times leaders are held to applying the rules across the group, and grace sometimes requires that you bend the rules or release the rules and don't apply them to let something happen.
And that's a good question.
Like the guy that's in traffic with you is breaking the rules.
Right. And institutionally is how is grace expressed. Now, in a church, you would think churches would be grace-filled places, but I know people say, I would never go to church because you're too judgmental over there. So I'm not sure that churches are. I'd like to think what we're doing at the Trauma Center as an institution, I don't know how it works in an educational environment, because the issue would be accountability. Are you just letting kids off the hook, or are you, but Oprah did a special the other day on trauma, and she went back to her home state and said that the key of this is not what's wrong with the child, but what happened to a child. And even that is a grace way of looking at a situation. So you have a kid with behavioral problems. We have kids with behavioral problems in my neighborhood. You wouldn't believe it. I'm just blown away. I don't know why they're all in my neighborhood, but they are. I'm sure it has to do with poverty. I'm sure it has to do with oppression and marginalization. I just haven't connected all the dots. But so am I going to handle these kids with this kind of absolute kind of rigid discipline? You all walk this way, step this way, do this. I'm not sure that works with these kids. So maybe it's that kind of and maybe that's already being done in many schools. I'm not sure, that's not my specialty. I would have definitely said that was the wrong way before I started working in this community, and now I get it a little bit better, that you have no idea what these children have been through. You have no idea what poverty does. You have no idea what deprivation means. When we were in Sudan, and there's so many connections that I'm making now, I remember going on a particular tour of this particular village, and the women came out to meet us when we got off the charter plane at this particular place, and we thought they were all excited to see us, and they were telling us that we had to get to the UN because they hadn't dropped the food in several days, and they were going through a famine. And the woman said, our children are eating leaves off the trees. And if I live to be 150 years old, I will never forget that moment of a woman saying, and she wasn't being, she wasn't a welfare queen, that was just her reality, and she needed some help, she needed some support. And she managed to live some grace-filled life in the midst of it. But then you think, wait a minute, you're eating leaves off the trees, and we just get to, I guess we need to hear each other's stories. I think that's a part of it, and that can happen in institutions. I'm working with the Red Sox. Don't tell anybody. They're doing internal work on this racism thing. I don't even like baseball. But I gotta tell you that I am really impressed by John Henry and the Red Sox, because he has taken this very seriously. So we are now doing some work of just talking to each other internally, the people who work there, sharing stories. This woman's been an usher for 50 years. She doesn't know the guy who's a security guard, and he doesn't know that she's had to face racism day in, day out, day in. Just the talking about it. In trauma, they say that talking about the bad things that happen to you actually reroute your brain circuits. So if you talk to one of these experts, they say that when you talk about the bad stuff, the really bad stuff, it actually rewires your brain circuitry. So I guess part of it is relational, what you are doing here today, and sharing each other's stories and getting to know each other. Does that sound too churchy? Because I've got to take this out of the church, but I think this is it. I don't think it's rocket science, but I think it has to do with change. Yes, sir? Oh, I'm sorry, I'll let you decide.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I'm very, very much moved by your presentation, and the notion of grace being a coping mechanism when we are all in a survival mode really resonates to me really very strong. From my accent, you probably recognize I'm not from United States originally.
Dorchester, right?
Yeah. I am from Siberian village, and we have a very interesting omit. You never return the empty dish if anyone give you food. And I was trying to dig out where that story is coming from. And it turned out that in the old villages, which were very devastated by the Second War and all atrocities happens before that, it was very important when you receive something, you return the dish with something. And what you call is sort of like, unmerited gift, so it means a lot, Reciprocity, yes, absolutely. But I'm all the time wondering if this type of a connections happens because of those memories about the atrocities and horrors live for a very long time, generation after generation after generation. They become like a part of the memory of the whole entire communities, and it's very difficult to wipe out these memories. So I'm just curious about your thought about how fears continue to keep those memories alive, and how the tolerance level to that horror, and atrocities in the communities, keep inability to come back and to start to think about grace.
Those are very good questions and very good points. The memory of the horror, keeping that alive, only to speak from my standpoint, what we try to do with this trauma intervention or this trauma work or this healing work is to change the memory a bit. Not change the memory, but reframe the memory. Okay, so the fact that you can talk about the rape, you can talk about what you saw, as difficult as that was, you are changing it because now you've become an observer to it, as opposed to not talking about it. So there's something in there that's your answer. I think it takes a lot of work, but this is the same post-traumatic stress disorder work that's done with Vietnam vets and vets from Afghanistan and people from war-torn countries. So I think there is a way that it's done that you can kind of get on top of that story a little differently. Does that make sense to you? So this horror happened to me, but I can tell you about it now, and in the telling, I have gained control of it a bit. Doesn't change the horror, but it puts me more in control over the experience. It's somewhere there that the answer lies, I think, if I'm answering your question. Was there another part of the question? I'm sorry.
It's a tolerance level.
About
the tolerance.
the tolerance level? The tolerance level for pain? We are much more, we are stronger than we know. I've seen this in children. You can take more than you think you can take. Is that a good thing? I'm not sure. This little girl who is just in my head day and night because I want her to be all right. Sometimes when we sit around and talk in our class, we have a tutoring class, and we always let the kids have time to talk. And she talks about the difficulty of, she says sometimes families can't help each other, and so you have to leave. And that's her broken way of saying that that her parents had to give her up. But that's her way of trying to make meaning. See, this is why religion works. Everybody downs religion, but religion, no matter what religion, I'm not pushing any, gives you a way to make meaning of stuff that doesn't have meaning. So this little girl, 9 years old, is trying to figure out, I gotta make this make sense if I'm gonna go on. And so she's rewriting her story. And she's not quite there yet, and she'll be doing it the rest of her life, but that practice is helping her. I know it is, I see it. That gives me a little hope with her.
Yeah, so after spending so many evenings together with you, it's a pleasure to see and hear you again.
You're looking good too.
I didn't think you knew I was there, but so your message resonates in many ways. I think in the Jamaica way of my many-year marriage, how many times I've chosen passive aggression over grace, and I can regret it now. But what I wanted to ask you to address specifically is grace in the middle of an active struggle. And to make that clear, I'm interested in the conversation you might want to have, and maybe you did have, with the people in the front line of that August march. and even to really push it, and this is difficult and really speculative, to what you might have wanted to say to those two men in the bar. So to me, those are really difficult and challenging moments. Yeah.
I have not had my conversation with the young people from Black Lives. Well, I've had one conversation with them, but not that group yet. Two of them were from out of town, and we just haven't caught up. I have spoken with my son about this notion of his generation, millennials, or I'm not sure which one it is, but the younger generation that shows this anger in Black Lives Matter. And his theory, and I think this is not just his, is that that's the way to get attention. That is righteous indignation. And so they believe, and very much to the point of grace, that grace doesn't work. And their argument is, and I read this somewhere, thank you for asking that question because I was going to put it in my presentation. Nobody remembers Moral Monday, which is a pastor, a black pastor out of the Carolinas. He's considered to be the next Dr. King. William Barber is his name. He is a dynamic speaker. Nobody remembers what he says, but everybody remembers Ferguson and the marches and the protest and the anger and the rage and the riots. And that's a way that our notion of grace is irrelevant. That's what they say to me. My son says, Mom, it gets more attention. It's the faster way to the end. My answer to him is keep living, because this is not going to work, because this is not sustainable, is my answer. Because where are you trying to get? I mean, what war, what did we really win in winning wars with aggression? I mean, to me, but it's a larger argument, and I may be wrong. So that's an ongoing conversation that I am having now with those young people. Those 2 men at the bar, if that had been my son, I would like to think he would have gotten up. It wouldn't have been a matter of race. But I understand their argument. I get it. I really do. And it's complicated. But I have taught my son that there are some things that transcend everything. To be a good person, right? To have values that matter. And some of them, and now the other thing, this was in a movie I saw. Denzel Washington did a movie where he actually, oh my goodness, it's Roman, yes, did you see it? So there's a scene, he's like probably autistic, he's a lawyer, he's got a lot of issues, but it's a very bizarre movie. I don't recommend that one, but I like him with the movie. But there's a scene where he's talking to, his whole persona in this movie is that he was a civil rights activist and a real dynamic revolutionary back in the day. So there's a scene where he's talking to some young activists, and a young man comes in and sits down, and the girls are standing up, and Denzel's character says, give those girls a seat. And the women curse Denzel out. They don't want to be treated that way. So I get it. There's some things that have gone on to a different level. Civility, I don't know. But as for me and my house, controlling the things that I can, I try to tell my son that there are things that transcend whatever we're going through, and that you are willing to sacrifice a little for somebody else, be it a man or a woman, but certainly a woman and certainly an old person. But I get that that's not how people think anymore, so I would say it to you, but I'm not sure I would say it anywhere else because they're not really listening. I don't know. It's a tough, but I am having the conversation with the people in my community who are Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to talk. And I don't know what they've won with their anger. I don't know, except for attention. So.
John Runstadler from the Veterinary School. You just touched on this in your last answer a little bit, but I'm wondering, you spoke of grace as something that we all sort of know and we may practice, but the importance of holding it up as a model or as a way. And I'm wondering how much you feel, or if you feel like you're in conflict with people who are holding up the opposite of that as the way, or however you want to put it, the opposite of that as a way to deal with things?
Am I in conflict with them? I think I can hear them better this way. I think I'm listening more closely to the Black Lives Matter because I'm trying to get deeper into what drives them. Not what's wrong with them, but what happened to them. Not, you know what so I'm trying to look at it, changing the path of understanding. So I think I'm not in conflict with them. I'd like to think I'm not in conflict with anybody. That does not bear out on 93, I know. It's a real issue. And it reminds me that it's something I have to constantly work on. But I would like to think, like David Carradine's character, that I am you know, there's a song, a statement that Fannie Lou Hamer made back in 1964 at the Democratic Convention when she was talking about the Civil Rights Movement. And she said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And it fits. I am at that point in my life that I no longer want drama. So personally, I'm going to try this way. So that's what I'm saying. I don't feel in conflict. There are people in my church, my God, if you want to go to wars, go to church. There are the deacons and the ushers and oh my Lord, come on, it's 30 of us here. What is this about? We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that in a church. So I am trying to teach them that we have to be representatives and expressors of this grace with each other.
Do you hear them being in conflict with you, though, saying that this is not, grace is not the way?
In my church, it's a constant. It's why we have church every Sunday morning, right? Why we keep coming back. It's a constant effort. There is a text, if I may, end on this or get to this point, that says, "I will abide in you if you will abide in me." And it's the text in the New Testament. Shelley Rambo from Boston University has written an incredible book on spirit and trauma. And she is a professor of theology, and I think she may also be a medical doctor, I'm not sure, but she is worth reading. And she has taken this text, abide, and she likens it to, or she uses the story of Katrina. And she says when the hurricane hit, if you go now to, that was many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it hit, 1994, 1998, whenever the hurricane hit. I'm sorry, I'm so storm engaged now. The hurricane hit. If you go to New Orleans today, there will be people that tell you the hurricane is over and you can go to the Big Easy and you can have fun and everything is resolved and it's over. We're having a good time and New Orleans has healed. But if you go to the 9th Ward, people are still there, still fighting the same fight they were fighting. I don't know if this answers your question, but the battles that people fight are ongoing battles. And so she said the only way to even begin to deal with that kind of situation, that kind of trauma, is abiding, meaning I'm going to remain with you. So when I tell my young people who get married, here's the deal, commitment, not just to each other, but to the marriage, which means unless you're beating each other, unless you're hurting each other, unless you're abusing each other, everything else can be worked out. Here's the deal, North Korea, let's take nuclear war off the table. If we could take that off the table, we will abide. We're going to stay here until we can work this out. You see what I mean? Abiding means remaining. So what I do with my church people, what I do with the trauma people, what I'm trying to do in life until I die, is I'm going to stay here because this is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm going to try to work this out with you another way. I'm going to be kind on Jamaica Way. I'm going to not try to fight on the 93. I'm going to remain, and in remaining, try to change the situation. Does that make sense? And that's how I would handle those who insist on being in conflict. Did that sound too sermon-y? I'm sorry. That's all right. I believe. That's what I believe.
The Duke abides.
So thank you very much for this conversation, and I'm also from the veterinary school. Nick Frank is my name. I'm going to wander around a little bit because I've been sitting here having sort of a struggle with myself over this because I agree with so much of what you've said, and yet I also worry that we allow normalization of where we've got to in society, and that if we're not standing up for civility and trying to promote civility within our society, then the rules are being changed, and we're allowing them to be changed. And I think sometimes if we rationalize and allow ourselves to normalize situations, then there's, you know, this loss of a statement to be made to push back. And I feel like we need to push back and re-establish civility. I wanted to end this question with a specific, though. It seems very much that if one takes a back seat or tries to find grace and to not rise to the occasion in many ways, that the media plays a role in this. And with your background, I hoped you might comment on that. The media wants to see the show. The media wants to see the outbursts, wants to see the anger. That's what gets played. The more civil the discourse, perhaps the less likely it is to show up on television. And I wondered, with your background, if you could comment on that.
You're absolutely right. As I said earlier, the media wants confrontation. That's what sells television, and so there's no argument there. And if you do the thing that is, I don't think it's about backing up, though. And if I said that, that was not my intent. I'm not saying, I believe my grace gives me power. I can go and talk to a gangbanger now that I might not have been afraid of before, because I'm not coming in conflict. I'm coming, now he has to adjust and see that, but so far so good. Do you know what I'm saying? So there is a way of carrying myself. Barack Obama, again, is my example. That may or may not win a specific argument, but I think that is a strength, not a weakness. So television is not going to be your friend there, but we may be at the end of television news as it is. And I hate to say that, but I think that social media, I think that the money's involved, I think that, I'm looking at the big picture, so I could be talking about something that's 200 years out. I think that what young people are doing is kind of redefining how we talk and what we talk and what's important, and so social media has become more important than TV, right? That's why our president tweets, right? Or twits, or what is it? Tweets. How did it? Help me, Lord. I have no idea. Whatever. But my point is, so that's changing. So television is what it is. I'm not sure. People are not watching TV as much as they were watching before. That's a fact. The numbers are down. That's why they are doing what they're doing. So I don't know how powerful they will be in the future. So I'm not so sure I would hang everything on that or worry about that. And back to just that sliver of time when Martin Luther King had this non-resistance, and they took that right to the front. They took that, not Gandhi took that. I mean, it has been done, so this is not new. And we look back on those times, they're like this romantic hero, but those were real times and real people who said, you know what, there's a way to do this with nonviolent resistance, which was another way of saying with grace and love. I'm not going to fight you. It's that mutuality. I'm going to be the best that I can be so I can touch the best in you. So it's that kind of thing, which Desmond Tutu still talks about. So that's what I think we have to put to the front. It's not a weakness. Everybody's not listening, but like I say to these young people, keep fighting and see where that takes you. I just don't get that. But we should stand up for what we believe. I think these marches are wonderful. I think these protests are wonderful. But I don't think they have to be violent. I don't think they have to be aggressive. I think the real key with these young people is persistence. Don't give up. That's the key. Hang in there. Perseverance. Hang in there. Because you are making a statement and something is changing in the statement. So that's what I say on that. Okay? Have I done my...